Hi, all. I'm excited today to talk about some really fascinating insights that we've gained from the Student Impact Survey. Over 4,500 students completed that survey over the last couple of months, and I'm joined today by Viva Gore, who is our Director of Retention Intelligence at FAIRS Resources. She has been working extremely hard to understand what the data is telling us about how students experienced March and April and being sent home and having to take online classes. And what she's uncovered, I think, is really important for you all to hear as you're thinking about planning your fall semester. So today we're going to talk really specifically about the question on the survey that asked about online classes. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I know so many of you guys are planning what's going to happen in the fall. You may be doing on ground, you may be doing hybrid, you may be doing an online class. And if you are going to do a hybrid class or you're going to open in the fall with online classes, it's incredibly important to understand how 18 to 22-year-olds are experiencing online classes as they've been moved to take those classes. So Viva, what is the actual question on the survey that we asked?
So we asked students, what is the hardest thing for you about taking online classes?
And tell me what you found that they said.
All right. So I'm going to go through like 5 top things, key things that students kept mentioning that they found difficult. And the first one was mentioned by roughly 23% of students. And it was that they struggled to stay focused, escape distraction, or to stay motivated with the move to online classes.
So that's interesting because that's really about like the space to be able to be focused and do the work that you need to.
Yeah, so a lot of students mentioned that it was hard to find a quiet place to work in the house or just being distracted by other people in their home. Some specifically mentioned just it being a different environment and missing kind of the academic mindset that you have just from being on a campus. So I had one student kind of expressing that. I feel extremely unmotivated no matter how hard I try to get the work done. I'm less productive at home because I do not feel like I'm in the same working environment as I am in school when I can do work with my friends and feel the motivation and productivity off of them.
That's really interesting. I mean, you can imagine students come home and it feels like summer break or like Christmas break, but they're supposed to still be doing classes. So I can imagine that would be hard. I think those of us who've had to work from home feel a really similar sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess it's kind of related, but a little bit different. Some students just mentioned it harder to focus during online lectures. It's just this kind of, it's much harder for them to engage with online content compared to being actually in a classroom and having a teacher go through the material that way, which we'll kind of talk about in the other top 5s. But
Interesting. So is that about they feel like they're having to work harder to stay present when the faculty member is lecturing, you think? Or it's just they are missing all of the stuff that goes on in a classroom?
I think it's a lot of students were mentioning the face-to-face interaction with a teacher and yeah, just feeling present. So I guess it's harder to, I think, especially with students who aren't having classes taught synchronously, that they're having videos that they're just kind of having to watch at their own time. It can be harder to engage in those.
Absolutely. Okay, what else did you find?
So the next, this is very related to what we were just talking about, is that students found it much harder with the reduction in the amount of interaction that they had with professors, and how much harder it was, like there wasn't the ease of interaction. So this was mentioned by around 15% of students. And a key thing around this that they kept mentioning was that it's just so much harder to ask questions to professors. So this might be in a lecture if they don't understand something and they want to just get further clarification, but also if they get an assignment where they don't understand what's being asked of them, they can't really easily just say, what do you actually want me to do?
Yeah, right. It's like a long rigmarole back and forth between them and faculty, right? Instead of just, can you explain that again?
Yeah. So I think I have some quotes that kind of say this. The hardest thing about taking online classes is that some of the professors may give out work we don't understand, and since we don't have face-to-face communication, it's kind of hard to explain something to someone through message. a lot of miscommunication happens through message.
Yeah, that I can imagine that's true. Just it is hard enough when you're in a class to understand what your faculty needs from you, much less you're just reading it or you're listening to a lecture, and that can feel really overwhelming. It actually feels like more work, right? To just like it takes so much more work just to understand.
Yeah.
Did, did students say anything about keeping up with like more work in the classroom?
Yeah, that was another one of our key kind of areas that they found difficult. It's the next one. So they felt like they were being assigned a lot more work to just take place of having in-person lectures, and that their professors felt that they had a lot more time since moving home for some reason, which students were quite upset about because they felt like I have so much more work in all of my classes. I'm having to deal with a lot of other stressors outside of school. And it's just harder to balance it with other things going on in my life right now.
So I wonder about that, the increased amount of work. I think sometimes it's because faculty have to have something to measure. So they're coming up with this kind of tracking because we're not in class, so I don't know if you're participating or if you know what's going on. So I want you to make discussion posts and I want you to talk about this thing and I want, right? And so a lot of that is faculty kind of floundering to know how to measure something, and that resulting actually in just a lot more work for students.
Yeah, and I think so there's kind of how much work there is, but then students were also within that talking about the kind of work they're being assigned. So a lot of students did use the term busy work. I think it comes back to that discussion post. I have a quote specifically from a student saying, almost all of my professors doubled or tripled my workload. I spent more time writing discussion boards than actually learning the information.
Yeah, I can imagine for many students, that is just a foreign thing they've never had to do before. And all of a sudden, like, what, I don't know why I just keep writing the same post when I'm not really clear what we're talking about, right? Okay, what else did they tell you?
So students felt like they were receiving a lot more work, that they were having to do a lot more, but at the same time, they felt like they were receiving less in terms of the instruction that they were getting from professors. This is roughly 10% of students. And a lot of them were talking about how they're having to teach themselves now, or that that's how they feel, that their in class instruction is being replaced with self-guided work, and it makes it harder for them to actually understand or make sure that they understand the material.
My goodness, and I would imagine that there are some classes where that would be especially hard. So if you think about some of the math classes that students have, if that's something that's hard for you and you have to watch these videos, which we already know they're saying it's hard to stay present, there are particular kinds of classes that would be very overwhelming for students to try and teach themselves in, for sure.
Yeah,
Anything else about that?
yeah. So students did specifically mention that there was that they feel like they're receiving less explanation. So this did seem to be particularly hard for kind of STEM classes where they're used to a professor going through a detailed example, working through it with them. They're finding that hard. But also for other classes that are very discussion based, they're finding it much harder. So like this student is a philosophy major, they said, conversations are crucial to my understanding of the content. Online discussion posts are not the same as talking to each other. It's kind of like talking it out and understanding it from different points of view.
That's really interesting that you would have on both sides of the scale, right? Like a practical, like do this step by step, which is harder. And then also, I want to hear what you have to say and refine my thoughts based on this discussion that we're having. That's really interesting. Okay, are we down to our last one?
Yes.
Okay,
So the last one is students struggling with a lack of structure since moving to online classes, or struggling with creating their own routine or managing their time. It was mentioned by around 8% of students, but I think it's kind of underpinning a lot of other things that students are talking about, but not explicitly saying, like students saying they wish that their online classes were at the same time of day, or that they were receiving assignments in the same way.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So that one's interesting because I feel like we talked about this before where students were saying like, I can't keep track of what's due when because faculty have just like broken all structure and said like, this is due Friday and this is due Sunday. And then you have this other thing. And so part of their hard work is to try to just keep track of what is due and when and for what class. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, so that issue alone, just by itself, was brought up by around 5% of students, just saying, talking about how they would normally have a syllabus, they normally have deadlines set for specific days, or they normally just in class are reminded all of the time of the assignments that they have. So it's just a lot of different reasons, but students are finding it really hard to keep track of their deadlines.
Yeah.
Um,
So the reason it's so important to talk about this stuff is because I keep saying we did crisis management in March where we sent everybody home and we sent everyone online and then we just kind of had to do the best we could. But in the fall, we will have had, 6 months to prepare to do online classes better for this particular population. And I think it's incredibly important. What I hear coming out of this data is that we have to figure out how to structure online classes for 18-year-olds in order to address these issues of a lack of structure, feeling like they're not being instructed, being confused about what they should be doing and missing spending time together. I think it's important to remember that traditional online classes were designed with a highly motivated student in mind who needs flexibility above all else. So if you think about non-traditional students who are saying, I need to be able to watch the video whenever I can, and I'm highly motivated to get this degree. I'm doing it because it's something that I'm committed to. I think what happened in the spring was in that rush to move classes online, we made some mistakes because we assumed that the kind of residential experts in how to teach online classes were going to be the best people to guide the shift of our traditional students to online classes. This is a completely different population though. And what I think they're saying and what you've uncovered by looking at that survey data is that they need really, really different things. I do think that the good news is that faculty know these students and they know what works for these students. So if we shift our language from online classes, which in a traditional sense is for highly motivated students who need flexibility, we shift that to be, these are classes that are delivered through Zoom for students who are telling us they need structure and they need access to faculty and they need motivation to be coming through those. So really practically, I think you provide structure when you have a same time, same place meeting for your class, like you would if they were on campus. And I think you make things due at the same time in the same place. So you kind of stay in your captured area there, right? Like if you're meeting Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:00, that's where you're collecting assignments. That's where you're spending time together. I do think it's fair to say that students may need flexibility. So we know that students have technology issues or internet issues or family issues or environment issues, and we want to be really sensitive to that. Some of your students may not be able to show up for those same time, same place classes, but I think that that should be an exception, not a rule. I think the expectation would be that students show up. And perhaps your accessibility services office, who's really familiar with coordinating and communicating sensitive student needs to faculty, can help manage students who need that flexibility in how they attend classes because there's a lot of other things going on. So we want to be sensitive to that, but students are telling us they need structure. The other thing that I like about having classes is that when you have classes, you have something to measure. So you don't have to create busy work like discussion boards and posts. You can measure engagement and participation in that 1 hour every Monday, Wednesday, Friday that you're meeting. It also solves the problem of students feeling like they can't ask questions and get them answered. So if you have a same time, same space, exactly as you said, Viva, they can raise their hand and say, I don't understand what we're talking about. Can you go over that again? I need clarity. I'm confused. That can happen in real time, which will cut out on so much work that our students are telling us they're doing just to have some understanding of what they should be doing. This is a quote one of us students gave us, and I think it sums up those ideas really well. They said, sometimes written word isn't the same as someone is explaining something to you. I feel like I'd be a bother if I emailed the professor every single time something didn't make sense. Discussion boards aren't usually discussions. They're just regurgitating what the previous person said in order to fulfill the proper grading criteria. I wish there was a way to properly discuss topics or questions with peers like you would in class. So there's a lot to think about as you're talking about online classes, but I think these issues that we've uncovered have said we need to do online classes differently for a different population. Please remember, students are having trouble staying motivated. They're missing their interaction with their faculty. They're having a hard time keeping up with assignments. They feel like they're teaching themselves, and they're really longing for structure that comes with those kind of classes that you know when they're going to be meeting every time. So I hope that's helpful as you guys are thinking about online classes. If you have any questions, please let us know. Viva, thank you so much for your work.